The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the stillness of midnight, exploding through the silence like lightning splitting a dark sky. My heart leapt into my throat, my hands scrambling clumsily for my phone as raw panic surged through me. I punched in 911 with shaking fingers, every nerve screaming in disbelief at what I had just heard. Then came the words that would change everything. My 17-year-old son, Logan, my rebellious, restless boy, stood pale in the shadows of his bedroom, clutching our family's hunting rifle like it might burn him alive. His voice came out low, almost broken. "Mom, I shot at that weird old guy's place." The blood drained from my face. This wasn't some childish prank. This wasn't teenage rebellion. The weight in Logan's trembling voice, the way his hands shook around the gun, the flicker of distant security lights dancing through the trees. It all told me the same truth. Something was horribly wrong. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. I recognized that look. He'd worn it as a boy when he'd broken the neighbor's window, when he'd lied about skipping school. Only this time it wasn't a broken vase or a missed class. His body looked crushed under an invisible burden. Shoulders hunched, head bowed low like a defendant awaiting a verdict he already knew. Hours later, the flashing headlights of black SUVs split through the night. Agents poured out in dark coats, their movements precise, rehearsed. At the front was Agent Morrison of the FBI, her face unreadable as she introduced herself. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, cool and firm, "your son targeted the cabin of General Wesley Cade." She let the words hang in the air like a hammer about to drop. "A decorated 4-star general. That cabin is not just a home, it is a designated federal evidence storage facility." I stared at her, unable to process. General Cade? Evidence? Facility? My son? Morrison held out a tablet. On the glowing screen, thermal footage played. Logan, my boy, standing outside Cade's cabin, aiming the rifle with deliberate care. Not a few seconds of reckless fumbling, 3 full minutes. Lining up his shot, waiting, then firing. It was proof that shattered his claim of an accident. But Morrison wasn't finished. Her tone grew colder as she scrolled through files. "We've also confirmed your son wiped his phone and laptop with military-grade software 48 hours before the incident. This isn't the work of a careless teenager. Someone provided him with tools far beyond his reach." She paused, studying me for any sign of deception. This shows planning. Coordination. This level of operational security suggests he was working with outside parties who have significant technical expertise. The room tilted around me. My boy hadn't just made a terrible mistake. He had been pulled into something far darker. Someone had prepared him, manipulated him, armed him with knowledge he should never have had. And now the word on Morrison's lips was heavy with dread. Domestic terrorism. But then came the shock that twisted the entire nightmare into something stranger still. General Cade, the man my son had fired upon, a 4-star officer with decades of command experience, refused to press charges. Instead, he sent me a message through the prosecutor's office. Morrison handed me a sealed envelope, her expression tight with unease. Inside was Logan's flattened bullet, wrapped in a slip of paper covered with Morse code dots and dashes. My hands shook as I borrowed Morrison's phone to decode the message. The translation froze my blood. Child being controlled. Check web history. 72 hours to find the real perpetrator. Cade knew. He wasn't seeking vengeance. He was warning me, giving us 3 days to uncover the truth. And if a man with his rank and intelligence background believed my son was being used, then the enemy behind this wasn't ordinary. It was dangerous beyond measure. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. That night, I called Jeffrey Stone, a digital forensics expert I had once worked with during my years as an investigative journalist. He was the best I knew, and he owed me a favor from the old days before my husband David died 5 years ago. When I explained the situation, his voice hardened. "If someone's pulling your son's strings, I'll find them." By dawn, Jeffrey arrived in his van, hauling equipment that looked more suited for a government surveillance team than a single specialist. He went to work immediately, diving into the fragments of Logan's digital life the manipulators had tried to erase. Hours later, his grim face told me what I already feared. "Logan accessed the dark web," Jeffrey said, pulling up traces of encrypted connections. "Not by accident. He was routed through military-grade proxies. Someone uploaded a video file directly to his device. He clicked play. My stomach twisted as I watched a grainy recording of a 13-year-old Logan at the wheel of a car, panicking as he crashed into another vehicle. 2 people were injured. Juvenile records. Sealed by the court. My hands flew to my mouth. No one should have had access to that footage. No one. But Jeffrey's next words were worse. They've been blackmailing him with this, threatening to ruin his future unless he completed a mission, activating something at Cade's cabin. I looked at my son, his guilt etched into his tired face, and felt fury rise in me hotter than fire. They had targeted him through his deepest wound, his guilt over a childhood accident, twisting it against him like a blade. His dreams of an MIT scholarship, his hopes for the future, they had weaponized them. Jeffrey's research led us to a name: Black Raven Security, a private contractor with a reputation for shadowy government work, the kind of company agencies used when they wanted deniability. Jeffrey traced communications back to them, his screen filled with tangled lines of networks and servers. "This wasn't random," he said. "This was a coordinated operation. They're using kids like Logan as pawns." That evening, I made my choice. I was done being a helpless mother watching her son sink. Drawing on my journalist instincts, I filed a Freedom of Information request on Cade, setting wheels in motion to expose what was happening. With Jeffrey, I built a dead man's switch that would automatically send all our evidence to lawyers and reporters if we were silenced. By 2 a.m., I sat in my office digging through records of Black Raven. Logan appeared at the door, shadows under his eyes, fear etched across his face. His voice cracked. "Mom, they said they have stuff on other kids, lots of them, in different states. What if we're not the only family?" His words hit harder than any bullet could. This wasn't just about us. Black Raven had been running a systematic operation across the country. Vulnerable families, teenagers with sealed records, guilt, or weaknesses. Children turned into weapons. I pulled him into a hug, feeling the fragility in his bones. "We'll clear your name," I whispered fiercely, "and we'll bring every single one of them down. They chose the wrong family." Just as he left with the first real smile I'd seen in weeks, my phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen from an untraceable number. "Mrs. Mitchell, we know you've been investigating matters beyond your understanding. You have 24 hours to convince your son to remain silent. Fail, and both your lives will become exponentially more complicated." The threat was unmistakable. They weren't hiding anymore. But they had underestimated me. They thought fear would silence a mother's determination. They were wrong. At dawn, Jeffrey's van rolled into my driveway again, packed with even more advanced gear. He unloaded computers and monitors into my dining room, turning it into a command center. His face was grim. "Karen, what I found is going to make you sick." Within minutes, data poured across his screens, a sprawling web of names, addresses, encrypted files. "Black Raven has compromised at least 73 families across 12 states, Jeffrey explained, pointing to highlighted entries. "Every case involves teenagers with some kind of leverage point. Your son wasn't chosen at random. They've been building this database for years." I leaned closer, scanning the chilling details. Teenagers coerced into hacking secure networks. Kids with juvenile records forced to plant surveillance bugs. Children of military families tricked into photographing classified documents. And Logan? His mission matched their playbook perfectly, forcing Cade to activate his security systems. What made me sick wasn't just the scope. It was the precision. Jeffrey pulled up encrypted chats between Black Raven operatives. They've got psychologists working for them. They study each target for weeks, when to push, when to threaten, when to isolate them from family. It's psychological warfare. I turned to my own laptop, drawing on every investigative skill I had left, digging through corporate filings, tracing the flow of money, shell companies in Delaware, offshore accounts scattered across islands I had only heard of in past investigations. The more I dug, the more the truth sharpened. "Jeffrey," I said, voice low, "this isn't just a rogue contractor. This is government money. I've seen these patterns before. Front companies used in CIA black budget operations." By noon, Jeffrey had broken into their communication servers. His fingers flew across keys as encrypted files unlocked one by one. He looked at me with something close to horror. "Karen, it's bigger than we thought. General Cade isn't their only target. He's just the biggest one. They've been using kids like Logan to strike at retired intelligence officers, defense contractors, whistleblowers, anyone who threatens them." The final realization hit like thunder. Logan's bullet wasn't meant to kill General Cade. It wasn't even about him directly. "They wanted him to activate his dead man's switch," I said slowly, the pieces sliding into place. "They wanted him to panic, to destroy the evidence he was protecting in that cabin. Logan was never the weapon. He was the trigger. But instead, Cade figured out that Logan was being controlled and decided to work with us to expose the people, really, responsible. That afternoon, I made a strategic decision that would either save our lives or get us both killed. Instead of waiting for Black Raven to make their next move, I would use Logana's bait to draw them into a trap of our own making. Working with Jeffrey, I had Logan send a message through the encrypted channels Black Raven had established, telling them he was ready to cooperate with additional missions to protect his family. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Logan asked nervously as he typed the message. "What if they figure out we're working with the FBI and General Cade?" Jeffrey had prepared for that possibility by creating multiple layers of digital deception that would make it appear Logan was acting alone out of fear. "We've made it look like you're panicking and desperate to keep them quiet," he explained to Logan. "They'll think they have you completely under their control, which will make them sloppy and overconfident." Within hours, Black Raven responded with instructions for Logan's next mission, confirming our worst fears about the scope of their operation. The new target wasn't another cabin or government facility. It was the home of Senator Patricia Williams, who chaired the Senate Intelligence Oversight Committee and had been asking uncomfortable questions about black budget spending on domestic surveillance programs. "They want you to plant a listening device in her home security system during a public event she's hosting next weekend," I read from their encrypted message. "This proves Black Raven is being used to spy on elected officials who threatened their funding sources." As evening approached, my phone rang with a call from General Cade himself, his deep voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded thousands of troops in combat. "Mrs. Mitchell, I believe it's time we met face-to-face to discuss our mutual problem," he said without preamble. "I have information about Black Raven's operations that will help you understand exactly what your family has stumbled into, but it's too sensitive to discuss over any electronic communication method." We agreed to meet at his cabin the following morning with Jeffrey providing electronic countermeasures to ensure our conversation wouldn't be monitored. That night, as Logan finally slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, I realized we were no longer just trying to clear his name or protect our family. We were now part of a larger battle between those who believed in constitutional government and those who thought they could operate above the law by terrorizing American families. Black Raven had made a fatal miscalculation when they targeted us because they'd awakened a mother's fury and a journalist's determination to expose the truth no matter what the personal cost might be. But as I prepared for bed, Jeffrey called with news that chilled me to the bone. "Karen, I just intercepted Communications indicating Black Raven has escalated your family to their permanent resolution list. They're no longer planning to just silence you. They're planning to eliminate you. I barely slept that night knowing Black Raven had escalated us to their kill list. But I wasn't about to let fear paralyze me when we were so close to exposing their operation. At sunrise, Jeffrey and I loaded our cars with recording equipment and electronic countermeasures, preparing for what could be the most dangerous meeting of my life. Karen, General Cad's cabin has military-grade security that will jam any surveillance attempts, but that also means we'll be completely cut off from outside help if this goes wrong, Jeffrey warned as we drove through the winding lakeside roads toward our destination. General Cad's property was nothing like I'd expected from the outside, appearing to be a simple wooden cabin surrounded by tall pines. But as we approached the front door, I could see subtle signs of serious fortification. The windows were too thick to be normal glass. There were carefully concealed cameras positioned at every angle, and the entire structure seemed to be built on a concrete foundation that suggested something much more substantial beneath the rustic exterior. When Cade opened the door, I was struck by how different he looked from the typical retired military officer. His eyes sharp and alert, despite being in his late 60s, carrying himself with the confident bearing of someone who'd commanded respect in the world's most dangerous places. Mrs. Mitchell, "Thank you for coming, despite the obvious risks involved," he said, gesturing for Jeffrey and me to enter his surprisingly spacious living room. "What I'm about to show you will explain everything about why Black Raven targeted your son and why they're so desperate to access what I've been protecting in this facility." He led us to what appeared to be a bookshelf. But when he pressed a hidden switch, the entire wall slid away to reveal a staircase descending into a sophisticated underground bunker that looked like something from a spy movie. The basement level was a high-tech operations center filled with servers, communication equipment, and multiple monitors displaying what appeared to be classified government documents. This isn't just a cabin. It's a secure data repository that I've been using to store evidence of war crimes and corruption involving dozens of high-ranking officials, Cade explained as he activated his computer systems. 5 years ago, I was ordered to eliminate 3 journalists who had discovered a massive weapons trafficking operation run jointly by CIA officers and Pentagon contractors, generating over $50 billion in illegal profits. My heart stopped when he pulled up a file labeled Damascus Operation Terminated Assets, and I saw my husband's photograph among the 3 journalists marked for elimination. David Mitchell was getting too close to exposing Director Evelyn Hart and her network of corrupt officials who were selling American weapons to terrorist organizations and pocketing the profits, Cade continued, his voice heavy with regret. I was given direct orders to arrange for all 3 journalists to have accidents while they were reporting from Syria, but I couldn't bring myself to murder innocent people seeking the truth. Instead of following orders, Cade had helped David fake his death and escape to Canada with a new identity while making it appear to his superiors that the elimination had been completed successfully. Your husband has been living under the name Thomas Bradley in Vancouver for the past 5 years. Unable to contact you or Logan, because any communication would have led Hart's people directly to him, he said, showing me recent photographs of David, with different colored hair and subtle facial surgery that made him nearly unrecognizable. The emotional impact of seeing David alive nearly knocked me to my knees, but Cade continued High's explanation with military precision. Hart discovered 3 months ago that I had helped David escape instead of eliminating him, and she's been trying to force me to activate the self-destruct protocol on this data repository ever since, he said, gesturing to the servers around us. The information stored here could bring down her entire criminal network and send dozens of government officials to federal prison for treason and war profiteering. Jeffrey, who had been quietly examining the technical setup, looked up with a growing understanding of the true scope of what we were dealing with. So Black Raven's mission wasn't really to hurt you or steal your data. They wanted to create enough of a security threat that you'd panic and wipe everything clean, he said. Logan's shooting was designed to trigger your defensive protocols and make you destroy the evidence that could expose Hart's operation. Cade nodded grimly, explaining that his security system was programmed to automatically purge all data if the facility came under sustained attack. But Black Raven had underestimated both Cad's tactical thinking and his moral character. When I saw the thermal imaging of your son taking careful aim, I knew immediately that he was being coerced by professionals, Cade said. A teenage prankster would have fired quickly and run away. But Logan's behavior showed all the signs of someone following detailed instructions under extreme psychological pressure. That's when he decided to reach out to us through Morse code instead of activating his defensive protocols. As we talked, Cade showed us the most damning evidence against Hart's network, including recorded phone conversations, financial records, of weapons sales, and documentation of at least 15 other journalists and whistleblowers who had been eliminated over the past decade. Director Hart isn't just running a simple corruption scheme. She's operating a shadow government within the intelligence community that considers itself above the law and accountable to no one. He explained, "Your family stumbled into a war that's been going on for years between those of us trying to preserve constitutional government and those who think they can rule through intimidation and murder." The weight of this revelation was staggering, but it also gave me a clear understanding of what we needed to do next. "General, we can't just hide this evidence anymore while Hart continues destroying lives," I said, my journalist instincts kicking into high gear. "We need to go public with everything, but in a way that protects all the families. Black Raven has been targeting and ensures Hart can't destroy the evidence before it reaches the right people." Cade smiled for the first time since we'd arrived, recognizing a kindred spirit who understood that sometimes the most dangerous course of action was also the most necessary one. "Mrs. Mitchell, I've been waiting 5 years for someone with your particular combination of skills and motivation to help me bring this fight into the open," he said. "But you need to understand that once we cross this line, Hart will use every resource at her disposal to eliminate us before we can expose her operation." As we prepared to leave his cabin with copies of the most crucial evidence, Cade handed me a secure satellite phone with a single number programmed into it. "When you're ready to contact your husband and let him know it's finally safe to come home, use this phone," he said quietly. "David has been waiting for this moment just as long as you have, and he's going to be incredibly proud of how brave and resourceful his wife and son have become." But as we walked toward our cars, Jeffrey's equipment detected multiple vehicles approaching through the forest, and we realized that Black Raven had found us. "Multiple vehicles, military formation approaching from 3 directions," Jeffrey announced, monitoring his detection equipment as we heard the distant sound of engines scudding through the forest silence. Cade immediately shifted into combat mode, his decades of military experience taking over as he assessed our tactical situation. "They found us faster than I expected, which means Hart has resources inside the FBI investigation," he said grimly, leading us back toward the cabin's reinforced entrance. "We have maybe 5 minutes before they establish a perimeter and cut off all escape routes." But instead of panic, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me as I realized this confrontation was inevitable and perhaps necessary for exposing the full scope of Hart's criminal network. "General, can your communication systems reach outside contacts, even if they jam more regular phones?" I asked, already formulating a plan that would turn Black Raven's assault into their own destruction. Cade nodded, explaining that his military satellite uplink was hardened against electronic warfare and could broadcast directly to media outlets and government officials simultaneously. That's when the miracle happened. As Black Raven operatives began emerging from the treine with tactical gear and assault weapons, a single figure appeared walking calmly down the main access road, hands visible and empty, but moving with the confident stride of someone who belonged in this dangerous situation. My heart nearly stopped when I recognized the walk, the posture, the way he carried himself despite 5 years of physical changes designed to hide his identity. "Oh my God," I whispered, grabbing Jeffrey's arm as recognition flooded through me. That's David. My husband had somehow anticipated this confrontation and traveled from Vancouver to be here at the exact moment when our family's survival depended on having every possible advantage. As he got closer, I could see the subtle facial surgery and hair, color changes that Kate had mentioned. But his eyes were unmistakably the same intense blue that had made me fall in love with him 20 years ago. Karen, I'm sorry I couldn't contact you sooner. But I've been tracking Black Raven's operations for months, waiting for the right moment to come home, he called out as Black Raven operatives hesitated. Confused by this unexpected variable in their carefully planned operation, David raised his hands to show he was carrying something that made the Black Raven team freeze completely. A laptop computer and external hard drives that apparently contained information they desperately needed to acquire or destroy. Director Hart, I know you're monitoring this operation through your tactical team, he announced loudly enough for their communication. Equipment to pick up his voice. I have copies of every financial transaction, every weapons shipment, and every assassination order you've issued over the past decade, and they're scheduled for automatic release to every major news organization, in exactly 6 hours unless I personally enter a cancellation code. The psychological impact of David's appearance and his dead man switch revelation was immediate and devastating to Black Raven's tactical advantage. Instead of a simple elimination mission against a retired general and a troublesome family, they were now facing a situation where killing any of us would automatically trigger the release of evidence that would destroy their entire operation. You see, I spent 5 years not just hiding from you, but building the most comprehensive intelligence archive about your criminal network that's ever been assembled, David continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had just shifted the balance of power completely. Jeffrey quickly set up his equipment to record everything happening while Cade activated his satellite communication system to broadcast our situation live to his contacts in Congress and the Pentagon. This is General Wesley Cade reporting a domestic terrorism incident involving CIA contractor Black Raven Security attempting to eliminate American citizens who possess evidence of treason and war crimes. He announced over military channels that Hart couldn't control or monitor. Within minutes, the entire tactical situation had reversed itself. Black Raven operatives found themselves surrounded not just by federal agents responding to CAD's emergency broadcast, but by news helicopters and congressional oversight personnel who had been secretly investigating Hart's operations for months. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband has been working with Senator Patricia Williams and the Senate Intelligence Committee to build a case against Director Hart. One of the arriving FBI supervisors explained his supposed death allowed him to gather evidence as a protected witness while staying hidden from Hart's surveillance network. The scope of the conspiracy David had uncovered was staggering, even beyond what Cade had revealed to us earlier. Hart's network includes not just weapons trafficking, but systematic assassination of journalists, blackmail of elected officials, and the creation of domestic terrorist incidents designed to justify increased intelligence budgets, David explained as we were moved to a secure location for debriefing. Black Raven was her primary operational tool for maintaining control over anyone who threatened to expose the shadow government she'd created within the CIA. Logan, who had been terrified and confused throughout this ordeal, finally understood the full scope of what had been done to him and why his psychological manipulation had been so important to Hart's plans. They weren't just trying to get me to shoot General Cad's cabin. They were trying to force him to destroy evidence that could send dozens of government officials to prison for treason, he said, his voice carrying a mixture of anger and determination that reminded me of his father. I was just a tool they were using to cover up murder and corruption at the highest levels of government. As federal agents secured the scene and began arresting Black Raven operatives, David pulled Logan and me, aside for our first real family conversation in 5 years. I know I can never make up for the pain I caused by letting you believe I was dead. But Hart's people would have killed you both if they'd known I was alive, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. Every day for 5 years I wanted to call you, to hold you, to be part of Logan's life. But I knew that staying hidden was the only way to eventually bring these criminals to justice. The reunion was emotional and overwhelming, but it was also interrupted by the arrival of congressional investigators who needed our immediate testimony about Black Raven's operations and Hart's criminal network. Director Hart has been placed under arrest along with 43 other officials in what may be the largest intelligence community corruption scandal in American history. Senator Williams announced as she arrived by helicopter with a full investigative team. Your family's courage in standing up to this criminal conspiracy has helped us expose a shadow government that was operating completely outside constitutional authority. But even as we prepared to testify before Congress and helped prosecute Hart's network, Jeffrey discovered something in Black Raven's communication intercepts that chilled us all. They were planning something called Operation Clean Slate for next week, designed to eliminate not just the 73 families they'd been targeting, but all the government officials and journalists who were getting too close to exposing Hart's operation, he announced grimly. Your family stumbled into this just in time to prevent what would have been the largest mass assassination event in American history. As we prepared to leave Cad's cabin with federal protection and head to Washington for emergency congressional hearings, I realized that Logan's single gunshot had indeed changed everything, just not in the way anyone could have predicted. We'd gone from a family torn apart by lies and manipulation to the key witnesses in bringing down a criminal conspiracy that had been operating at the highest levels of government for over a decade. 3 weeks after Hart's arrest, our family found ourselves living in a heavily guarded federal safe house while preparing for what news outlets were calling the most significant congressional hearing in decades. But Hart's criminal network wasn't going down without a fight, and they'd launched a sophisticated disinformation campaign designed to discredit our testimony before we ever reached Capitol Hill. They're using every dirty trick in the intelligence playbook, Senator Williams explained during one of our preparation sessions. Social media bots spreading conspiracy theories about your family, fake news stories claiming David faked his death for insurance money, and professional character assassination targeting General Cad's military record. The psychological warfare being waged against us was relentless and deeply personal. Logan woke up every morning to find cruel memes about him circulating on social media, calling him a deep state puppet and claiming his shooting of Cad's cabin was part of an elaborate hoax. Mom, they're posting my old school photos with captions, saying I'm a crisis actor, he said one morning, his voice heavy with frustration. My friends from high school are getting harassed by strangers demanding to know if I'm really the same person or if the government hired someone to play me. But instead of intimidating us into silence, Hart's desperate tactics only strengthened my resolve to expose the full scope of her criminal operation. Drawing on my journalism experience, I decided to fight fire with fire by launching our own media offensive. If Hart wants to turn this into a public relations war, then she's picked a fight with someone who knows how to win those battles, I told David as we planned our counterattack. Working with Senator Williams' communications team is scheduled appearances on every major news program, determined to tell our story directly to the American people before Hart's allies could poison the narrative completely. My first television interview was with CNN's Anderson Cooper, and I came prepared with documentation that would make it impossible for viewers to dismiss our claims as conspiracy theories. Mr. Cooper, I'm not asking anyone to take my word for what happened to our family, I said, pulling out bank records and encrypted communication logs that Jeffrey had recovered from Black Raven servers. I'm asking them to look at the evidence that shows a systematic pattern of government contractors targeting American families with psychological warfare techniques developed for overseas operations. The impact of presenting hard evidence on national television was immediate and devastating to Hart's defense strategy. Within hours of the interview airing, 3 more families came forward with nearly identical stories of their teenagers being blackmailed and manipulated by Black Raven operatives. It's like watching dominoes fall, Jeffrey observed as we monitored social media reactions to the broadcast. Hart's people spent so much energy trying to discredit us that they didn't prepare for other victims finding the courage to speak out. Logan, meanwhile, had transformed from a terrified teenager into a surprisingly effective advocate for other young people caught in Black Raven's web. He want to testify not just about what they did to me, but about the systematic way they're using kids as weapons against their own parents, he told the congressional investigators, preparing witness lists for the upcoming hearings. His decision to speak publicly, despite the personal cost, showed a maturity that made me incredibly proud and reminded me so much of his father's moral courage. David had been working around the clock with federal prosecutors to organize them massive amount of evidence he'd collected during his 5 years in hiding. Karen, what we're dealing with here isn't just corruption or even treason in the traditional sense, he explained as we reviewed financial records in our safe house. Hart created a shadow intelligence apparatus that was operating completely outside congressional oversight with its own budget, its own operatives, and its own target list of American citizens it considered threats to national security. The scope of Hart's criminal enterprise became clearer as more evidence emerged from raids on Black Raven facilities and CIA offices. She was running what amounts to a domestic assassination program disguised as contractor oversight. Senator Williams revealed during one of our briefings. The $50 billion in weapons trafficking was just the funding mechanism for a much larger operation designed to eliminate anyone who might expose government corruption or challenge intelligence community overreach. But Hart's most desperate move came when her remaining allies attempted to invoke national security classifications to prevent our testimony from being heard in open session. They're claiming that public disclosure of Black Raven's methods would compromise ongoing intelligence operations and endanger national security. Senator Williams explained, her voice tight with anger. It's the last refuge of criminals who know they can't defend their actions on the merits. I wasn't about to let Hart hide behind national security claims when she'd terrorized American families and murdered innocent journalists. Senator, if Hart's people want to claim national security privilege, then they need to explain how blackmailing teenagers and assassinating reporters makes America safer. I said during our final preparation meeting, the only security they were protecting was their own job security and their ability to operate above the law. The night before our scheduled testimony, Hart's lawyers made a final attempt to silence us through direct intimidation. A black sedan pulled up to our safe house, and 2 men in expensive suits approached our federal security detail with a briefcase full of what they claimed were classified documents. Mrs. Mitchell, we're prepared to offer your family complete financial security in exchange for limiting your testimony to the specific incidents involving your son. One of them said through our security intercom. Director Hart is willing to accept responsibility for operational overreach while maintaining the classification of methods and sources that protect ongoing national security interests. The bribe offer was simultaneously insulting and revealing. They're not offering us money, they're offering us hush money, David said, as we listened to the recording our security team had made of the encounter. Hart knows that our testimony will expose not just her personal crimes, but the entire system that allowed her to operate with impunity for over a decade. The fact that they were still trying to buy our silence showed how terrified they were of what we might reveal in an open congressional session. Logan's response to the bribe attempt showed how much he'd grown during this ordeal. Mom, even if they offered us $100 million, we can't take it because there are still kids out there being manipulated and families being torn apart by these people, he said with quiet determination. If we stay quiet now, we're basically saying it's okay for the government to terrorize families as long as they pay enough to cover up their crimes afterward. As we prepared for Beaton the night before our testimony, Jeffrey called with intelligence that made our mission even more urgent. I just intercepted communications showing that Hart's remaining network is planning to activate Operation Clean Slate within 72 hours, he said, his voice tense with concern. They're going to eliminate all 73 compromised families and blame it on a domestic terrorist organization. They've been setting up as a false flag operation. The stakes of our congressional testimony had just increased exponentially. We weren't just seeking justice for our family anymore. We were racing to prevent a mass casualty event that would make Hart's previous crime seem insignificant by comparison. The morning of our congressional testimony arrived with news that would change everything about our strategy and the stakes we were facing. Jeffrey burst into our safe house at dawn with his laptop showing intercepted communications that made my blood run cold. "Karen, they've moved up Operation Clean Slate to tonight just hours after your scheduled testimony," he announced grimly. Hart's remaining network knows that once your family speaks publicly, they'll lose any chance of containing the scandal. So, they're planning to eliminate all evidence and witnesses in one coordinated strike. The intelligence Jeffrey had gathered painted a terrifying picture of Hart's final gambit. They're planning to stage simultaneous terrorist attacks on all 73 compromised families, making it look like a domestic extremist group discovered the government's blackmail operations and decided to eliminate the victims to send a message. He explained, showing us detailed operational plans recovered from encrypted Black Raven servers. Then Hart's people will swoop in as the heroes investigating this tragedy while conveniently destroying any evidence that might implicate them in the original crimes. David immediately contacted Senator Williams and the FBI task force coordinating our protection. But the response was more complicated than we'd hoped. Half the law enforcement agencies we thought we could trust have been infiltrated by Hart's network, Senator Williams explained during an emergency briefing at our safe house. "We can't use normal channels to coordinate protection for all 73 families because we don't know which agents are loyal to constitutional government and which ones are loyal to Hart's shadow organization." This revelation forced us to completely rethink our approach to the congressional testimony and the broader fight against Hart's criminal network. Instead of simply exposing past crimes, we now had to actively prevent a mass casualty event while simultaneously gathering enough evidence to prosecute the perpetrators. We're not just witnesses anymore. We're the bait in a trap designed to catch the biggest fish in Hart's organization. I realized as we discussed our options with the congressional leadership, Logan, who had shown remarkable courage, throughout this ordeal, volunteered for the most dangerous part of our new strategy. "Mom, they're still monitoring my communications because they think I'm just a scared kid who might crack under pressure," he said with determination. That reminded me powerfully of his father. What if I send them a message saying I'm ready to testify, but I want to negotiate a deal where I only admit to the shooting and don't mention anything about blackmail or government involvement? The plan Logan proposed was brilliant in its simplicity and terrifying in its risks. By pretending to cooperate with Hart's people while secretly recording all communications, he could potentially gather real-time evidence of Operation Clean Slate, while making Hart's network believe they still had a chance to contain the scandal. It's incredibly dangerous because if they figure out he's working with us, they'll move him to the top of their elimination list, Jeffrey warned. But Logan was insistent that this was the only way to save the other 72 families. Working with federal prosecutors and congressional investigators, we developed what they called a honeypot operation that would use Logan's communications to track Hart's network in real time during the congressional hearing. We'll have surveillance teams positioned near every targeted family, but we need Hart's people to believe they're operating in secret until the last possible moment. Senator Williams explained, "Your son's performance during his testimony will determine whether we can catch them in the act or whether dozens of innocent people die tonight." That afternoon, as Logan prepared to send his fake cooperation message to Hart's handlers, I felt the weight of everything we'd been through and everything that still hung in the balance. "Honey, are you sure you want to do this?" I asked him one final time. "Once you send that message, Hart's people will think they own you again, and if anything goes wrong during the testimony, they might try to eliminate you right there in the congressional hearing room." Logan's response showed me that my 17-year-old son had grown into a man during this ordeal. "Mom, I spent weeks being terrorized by these people, thinking I was alone and helpless against their psychological manipulation," he said quietly. "Now, I know 72 other kids are going through the same thing, and if I don't help stop it tonight, some of them are going to die because I was too scared to take risks." His moral courage in that moment made me prouder than any parent has ever been. The message Logan sent to his Black Raven handlers was a masterpiece of deceptive communication that made him seem desperate and controllable while actually laying the groundwork for their destruction. "I can't handle the pressure anymore, and I just want this to be over," he wrote through their encrypted channels. "I'll testify that the shooting was my idea and that nobody forced me to do it, but I need guarantees that my family won't be hurt and that I won't go to prison." The response came back within minutes, confirming that Hart's people still believed they could manipulate him into destroying our case. But Logan had learned some tricks of his own during his weeks of being manipulated by Black Raven's psychological warfare experts. Hidden within his seemingly submissive message were digital breadcrumbs that Jeffrey could track, allowing us to monitor Hart's communications in real time. They're so focused on controlling the narrative that they're not paying attention to operational security, Jeffrey observed as data flowed across his screens. Logan just gave us a window into their entire command structure. A 7ing approached, and we prepared to leave for Capitol Hill. David pulled Logan and me aside for what might be our last conversation as a complete family. "No matter what happens during the testimony or afterward, I want you both to know that these past few weeks have shown me what extraordinary people you've become during the years I was away," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Karen, your courage and determination saved not just our family, but potentially hundreds of lives. Logan, you've shown the kind of moral character that most adults never develop." The drive to the Capitol building was surreal, with our motorcade of federal agents and congressional security personnel racing through Washington streets, while Jeffrey monitored communications, showing Hart's network mobilizing for Operation Clean Slate. "They're moving assets into position around all 73 target locations," he reported from his mobile command center, "but they're also sending additional operatives to the Capitol building, which suggests they might try something during the actual testimony." As we entered the Capitol building through secure underground tunnels, Senator Williams briefed us on the final elements of our strategy. "The hearing is being broadcast live to ensure maximum public exposure, but we've also arranged for simultaneous FBI raids on all known Black Raven facilities," she explained. "Your testimony will serve as the signal for law enforcement to move against Hart's entire network. But that also means you'll be speaking while active combat operations are taking place across the country." Logan checked his secure communications one final time before we entered the hearing room and saw a message that confirmed our worst fears about the scope of Hart's desperation. "They're not just planning to eliminate the 73 families tonight, they're planning to eliminate us during the testimony and claim we were killed by the same domestic terrorist organization," he said quietly. "Hart's people think they can turn us into martyrs while simultaneously destroying any evidence we might have presented." But as we walked into the packed congressional hearing room with cameras from every major news organization focused on our family, I felt a sense of calm determination that surprised me. We had spent weeks being manipulated, threatened, and terrorized by people who thought they could control American democracy through fear and violence. Tonight, in front of the entire world, we were going to prove them wrong and show that ordinary citizens still had the power to hold their government accountable. The chamber fell silent as we took our seats at the witness table, and I could see Hart's remaining allies in the gallery watching us with barely concealed desperation. They knew that once we started talking, their entire criminal empire would begin collapsing in real time. But what they didn't know was that Logan's phone was transmitting their location and communications to federal agents positioned throughout the building, ready to arrest anyone who tried to interfere with the democratic process. The packed congressional hearing room fell into absolute silence as Chairman Williams called the session to order with 17 million Americans watching the live broadcast and federal agents positioned at 73 locations across the country waiting for our testimony to trigger simultaneous raids on Hart's network. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to investigate what may be the most serious breach of constitutional government in our nation's history, she announced, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. The witnesses before us have risked everything to expose a criminal conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of our intelligence community. Logan stepped forward to the microphone first, and I could see Hart's remaining allies in the gallery leaning forward expectantly, believing they had successfully manipulated him into destroying our case. My name is Logan Mitchell, and 3 weeks ago I fired a rifle at General Wesley Cade's cabin because I believed I had no choice, he began, his voice steady despite the enormous pressure. But I wasn't acting alone, and I wasn't acting voluntarily. I was being blackmailed and psychologically manipulated by operatives working for CIA Director Evelyn Hart. The reaction in the hearing room was immediate and electric with Hart's supporters, realizing too late that their psychological control over Logan had been completely broken. As Logan methodically presented evidence of his weeks of torment, including recorded phone calls and encrypted messages, Jeffrey's equipment showed Hart's network frantically trying to abort Operation Clean Slate. They know the game is over, Jeffrey whispered to me. Monitoring communications showing Black Raven operatives receiving stand-down orders from their handlers. But Logan wasn't finished delivering devastating testimony. Director Hart's people didn't just target me. They've been systematically blackmailing and manipulating American children for years to use them as weapons against their own families, he continued, pulling out a tablet containing the comprehensive database Jeffrey had recovered. I have evidence showing 72 other families currently being terrorized by the same methods that were used against me. And Hart's network was planning to eliminate all of us tonight to cover up their crimes. When Logan played the audio recording of Hart's operatives discussing Operation Clean Slate, including their plan to stage fake terrorist attacks on innocent families, the hearing room erupted in shocked gasps and angry murmurs from the gallery. Several Congress members demanded immediate adjournment to brief law enforcement, but Logan held up his hand and continued speaking. There's more that America needs to hear before anyone leaves this room. David stepped forward to the microphone next, and the impact of a supposedly dead journalist appearing before Congress was visibly stunning to Hart's remaining supporters. My name is David Mitchell, and 5 years ago, Director Hart ordered my assassination along with 2 other journalists who had discovered her weapons trafficking operation, he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived years of hiding to reach this moment. General Cade risked his career and his life to help me fake my death and gather evidence against the criminal network that has been operating within our government. The evidence David presented was overwhelming and undeniable, including financial records showing $50 billion in illegal weapons sales, recorded conversations between Hart and her co-conspirators, and documentation of at least 15 murders disguised as accidents. Director Hart created a shadow government within the CIA that considered itself above the law and accountable to no one. David explained, his testimony broadcast lived to a transfixed nation. They used American intelligence resources to commit crimes against American citizens while enriching themselves through weapons trafficking and extortion. General Cade's testimony provided the final devastating blow to Hart's criminal enterprise. I served my country for 40 years, and never imagined that I would one day be testifying about treason committed by our own intelligence officials. He said, his military bearing commanding absolute attention from everyone in the room. Director Hart and her network represent a very thing that our Constitution was designed to prevent a secret government operating without oversight or accountability using fear and violence to maintain power. As Cade presented classified documents showing the full scope of Hart's operations, including plans for domestic surveillance and assassination programs that would have made America indistinguishable from a totalitarian state. FBI agents throughout the hearing room moved simultaneously to arrest Hart's remaining supporters. Operation Clean Slate wasn't just about eliminating 73 families, Cade revealed. It was the first phase of a broader plan to eliminate hundreds of journalists, whistleblowers, and elected officials who posed threats to Hart's shadow government. The conclusion of our testimony coincided with news reports of successful FBI raids across the country, resulting in the arrest of over 200 operatives and the rescue of all 73 targeted families. Justice has been served not just for our family, but for every American family that was terrorized by this criminal conspiracy. I said in my closing statement, "Our constitutional system of government survived its greatest internal threat because ordinary citizens found the courage to stand up against extraordinary corruption. 1 year later, our family has found peace and purpose beyond what I could have imagined during our darkest moments." Logan received a full scholarship to MIT and has become a national advocate for protecting children from online manipulation and blackmail. David's book, 5 Years Underground, became a bestseller and sparked congressional reforms of intelligence oversight. General Cade was restored to full honors and now serves as special advisor on government transparency. I was appointed to the newly created Commission on Intelligence Community Reform, working to ensure that Hart's crimes can never be repeated. Hart and 47 co-conspirators received life sentences for treason, murder, and crimes against humanity. Black Raven Security was permanently dissolved, and its assets were used to compensate the families they had terrorized. The 73 children who had been manipulated received counseling and support, with many becoming advocates for other victims of government abuse. When Logan fired that shot, I never imagined it would expose a government conspiracy threatening dozens of families like ours. As a mother, I learned that sometimes ordinary people must find extraordinary courage to protect what matters most. If our story of fighting back against corruption and manipulation resonates with you, please like this video and subscribe to Happer Stories. Your support helps us share more real accounts of families who refused to stay silent when justice was on.